Hello, Cafe Soul Pod, Sister Chrissy here. There's a lot of talk on cannabis at the moment, and I'd like to know, what are the facts today? There has been further research. I've always thought it's a natural plant, but like everything else in life, it's how it's used and everything in moderation. What are your thoughts is what I want to know. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information. This comes from the it's the University of Colorado. So a study finds cannabis usage in middle-aged and older adults associated with larger brain volume and better cognitive function. I will put links actually in the comment section, description section. So they use the biobank data from the United Kingdom to help researchers examine drug usage in understudied groups. So the research studying the effects of cannabis on the brain has often focused on adolescents, but a new study from CU, the Colorado University, researchers looks at population-level impacts of cannabis usage on the brain in older adults. More older adults are using it. It's more widely available and is being used for different reasons than in the younger folk, such as for sleep and chronic pain, said Anika Guha, PhD, a clinical psychologist and faculty research associate in the Department of Psychiatry at Colorado University. Plus, people are living longer. We have to be asking, what are the long-term effects of cannabis use as we continue to age? The research team found that cannabis usage in older adults was generally associated with larger volumes in several brain regions and better cognitive function in adults aged 40 to 77. Gua said she was surprised by the extent of the positive findings, but she did emphasize that cannabis use studies are difficult with often unknown variables. So it depends on potencies of the cannabis, etc., and how it's not used. So the key points of the research found larger brain volumes and better cognitive function among middle-aged and older adults who used cannabis, especially in moderate use cases. The areas of the brain studied include learning and memory, processing speed, attention and executive function, traditionally thought of at odds with cannabis consumption. However, another brain region saw lower volumes, suggesting the impact cannabis has on the brain is complex and nuanced, requiring further investigation. And those areas were apparently memory and emotions. Well, can it be the memory? Because it showed. What memory is that? Is it a different part of the memory that was positive? I don't know. So maybe it's more on the emotional side. We're really interested in thinking about both the benefits and risks and understanding this drug in the context of mental health, dementia, and more. There's so much more to explore. That's what the professional says. In the following Q&A, Gua details the study's findings, the complexities of studying relationships between brain function and cannabis, and why nuanced discussion around studying the drug is critical. So the first question was, what did you and the team find on the impact cannabis has on brain function for older adults? The big picture overall finding was the greater lifetime cannabis use among middle-aged and older adults, in brackets, a total of 26,362 participants aged 40 to 77 with an average age of 55 were generally associated with a larger brain volumes and better cognitive function. Specifically, we assessed brain regions that are associated with high cannabinoid receptor CB1 density, which we thought would likely be impacted by cannabis use. We also looked at domains of cognitive function that have been associated with cannabis use in the past, including learning and memory, processing speed, attention, and executive function. One of the The next question. One of the phrases used in the paper was that cannabis was associated with increased regional brain volume. Can you walk us through that? It refers to the fact that we were investigating specific parts of the brain and looking at their individual volumes as opposed to overall or total brain volume. Some studies will just say there was an impact of cannabis on overall grey matter. However, we wanted to take a more nuanced approach by looking at effects on specific brain regions, especially those with CB1 receptor density, as well as on cognitive processes like memory, which is, of course, very relevant to aging. For example, the hippocampus was one of the regions we looked at since it contains many CB1 receptors and plays an important role in memory, especially as we age, and is also implicated in dementia. What does it mean to have bigger brain volumes? It's not the bigger is always better, but we also know that as we age, we often see smaller brain volumes due to processes like atrophy and neurodegeneration. That decrease is often correlated with reduced cognitive function and increased dementia risk. In this study, we did see that most of the brain regions we looked at demonstrated a positive relationship between brain volume and cognitive performance. So in this sense, we could think of larger brain volumes in the context of aging as possibly reflecting maintained brain volume and preserved cognition, like cognitive function, as opposed to, say, something like atrophy that we expect to occur with age. Were there any sex differences? We considered sex as an important factor, specifically to understand whether it moderated or impacted the effects of cannabis for two reasons. And when they're on about that, they're on about male, female. One, we know that men and women tend to use cannabis differently. So they've got different patterns of use and they report different subjective effects. And two, from the preclinical research, there's evidence that the endocannabinoid system is different in men than women. So the density of cannabinoid receptors differs and there seem to be complex interactions with hormones. And while there wasn't a clear-cut or consistent pattern, like male cannabis users always showing more favourable effects than women, we did see significant interactions across several brain regions and cognitive measures, which really suggests that sex is something we need to be looking at because it seems to be an important factor, whether you're male or female. Next question was, what were the results by cannabis usage category? We did see that for many of our outcome measures, moderation seemed to be the best. For the brain regions and cognitive tests that demonstrated an effect, the moderate use group generally had larger brain volumes and better cognitive performance. At the same time, there were a few measures like volume of the right amygdala and visual memory and learning, where the high use group had the best outcomes. I think that really suggests that there are dose-dependent effects. As a caveat, we didn't have access to detailed information about the patterns of usage, so that would be helpful as an additional contextual information. The next question was asked, did you see any negative effects? I will say one of the things that was really interesting was that although for almost everything looked at, there was this positive relationship. There was a single brain region where we saw that higher cannabis use was actually associated with lower brain volume. The posterior cingulate, which is part of the limbic system and is implicated in processes like memory, learning, and emotion. That said, some research suggests smaller posterior cingulate volume is actually associated with better working memory, so it's a little unclear what this means. It's a good reminder that these effects involve multiple processes. It's not all good or all bad. They were asked, why did you use the UK Biobank? It's a huge data set, providing a great sample of older adults with a lot of awesome health measures important to aging, like neuroimaging and cognitive assessment, It also includes some information on the use, which gave us a really good starting point for our investigation. Biobanks are a great resource for a small lab like us because we could never feasibly have a data set that large. It's an incredible tool to look at small to moderate effects. How did the UK Biobank measure cannabis usage, and how did you categorise the data? In the UK Biobank, people were asked to estimate how many times they'd used cannabis over their lifetime, choosing from a set of ranges. We ended up grouping people into no use, moderate use, and high use, based on the number of times they used cannabis. And of course, that's an imperfect way to group people, but it did allow us to approximate dose-dependent effects. The next question, was there anything that you and the team were surprised by once you started processing the data? Even though preliminary work by our group and some of our colleagues who have also been focused on older adults had been seeing these beneficial relationships in older adults using cannabis, I was a little surprised that every cognitive measure that demonstrated a significant effect showed better performance among cannabis users. It goes against your default assumptions, because I think a lot of research out there has shown cannabis as associated with worse cognitive function. And it's shown now, no, that's not right. What do you want people to know about this research? I think the main takeaway is that the story is nuanced. It's not a case of cannabis being all good or all bad. I think sometimes people have seen my poster on this project, or they see the headline and they say, great, I'll just use more. But it's more complicated than that. I think it depends on how people are using and what outcomes you're looking for. What products are being used for what reasons, and what part of the lifespan are we looking at? Those are the important questions, and we're still figuring it out. For example, I'm interested in the effects of THC versus CBD. We don't have any of that information in the UK Biobank. Most people in this study were using cannabis quite a while ago, and cannabis at that time looked very different than it does today. And apparently that context really matters, and it's a complex picture. Next question. Where does your research go next? We do have another paper under review right now looking at connectivity or function of the brain in these same older adults. These data suggest there are also positive impacts of cannabis on the function of these brain regions, not just the size or volume of them too. Moving beyond cannabis, we're also beginning to explore relationships between brain health and psilocybin, psilocybin use. Don't know what that is. Why is this research so important? These substances are often marketed as health promoting and beneficial to certain populations or for certain conditions like chronic pain or depression. And we don't have solid clinical trials to support or refute that, or how that might look different with aging. I think it's a very exciting time where we're still figuring out what's going on, and it's especially important for public health and policy. If people are using these substances, it's worth knowing what the impacts are, both good and bad. So the date on this study is February the 3rd, 2026. And I'll put the link in the description on the video. Now then, 25th of February 2026 in the BMJ journals, which was mentioned in that study, cannabis use, cognitive function and dementia risk in older adults, observational and genetic analysis. So it's got like how they do it, the background, objective, methods, findings, conclusions. So the background. The cognitive effects of cannabis use in older adults remain unclear despite increasing use for medical and recreational purposes in this age group. So that's the background. That's why they've gone in to look at it. Objective, to investigate associations between cannabis use, cognitive performance and dementia risk in older individuals, using large population cohorts and and Mendelian randomization, MR, to explore potential causal relationships. The methods used, observational analysis, were conducted using the UK Biobank and the US Million Veteran Programme. In UKB, the Biobank, cross-sectional and longitudinal cognitive performance across 5 domains was compared between lifetime cannabis users. Up to 18,975 participants took part. Non-users, up to 60,598. In the US Million Veteran, it's got Canada in the brackets there. CanUD, 12,222, I think, was examined in relation to incident all-cause dementia using Cox proportional hazards models. MR analysis assessed potential bi-directional causal relationships between cannabis use, cognitive function and dementia. So literally they had a lot of people from different places, and they were looking at the relationship between the use and the cognitive function of the brain in connection with dementia. The findings. At baseline, cannabis users performed modestly better on tests of numeric memory and fluid intelligence, but no significant difference was observed in longitudinal cognitive change. In MVP, CanUD was not significantly associated with dementia risk. MR analysis provided no evidence of a causal relationship between cannabis use and either cognitive performance or dementia risk. The conclusion: cannabis use was not linked to longitudinal cognitive decline or dementia risk. Within the limits of these cohorts, we found no evidence that cannabis use contributes substantially to cognitive aging or dementia risk in older adults. Further research with detailed exposure assessment and longer follow-up is warranted to confirm these findings. The clinical implications: cannabis use in older adults does not appear linked to faster cognitive decline or higher dementia risk. Occasional or prior use may not substantially affect cognitive aging, though safety of higher doses or prolonged use remains uncertain. So they're still researching on it. So I want to know your thoughts. And I'm going to try and get some guests on a podcast to discuss the division between yes and no's, the fors and againsts, and the whys. And I personally think it's an amazing plant for medicinal use. And again, it's all about how it's being used, what it's being used for, what's the intent, and the dosage. I mean, are you smoking it to get stoned, or are you smoking it to as a medication, or putting it in a cookie or something? So let us know your thoughts. If you have any questions on it, let us know also. But before people jump on bandwagons, go and do some research. This is recent research. It's this year, February 3rd, 2026. We've come a long way, folks, in science. We've come a long way in biology and stuff and chemistry and all those things that is needed combined to do researches and find out things, what's going on. And these studies are shown that literally, it improves volume, it improves your cognition, it improves all those things. And if this kind of research, and this could help halt things like dementia, Alzheimer's, even Parkinson's, things like that, how amazing would that be? In its purest form, I've got to say, and from my own point of view, in its purest form, plant form, not synthetic, plant form. But again, it's how it's used. And if it was in my point of view, if it was decriminalised and every household that smoked was allowed a plant, that would get rid of all the farms. That would get rid of all that, because what would be the need? We can have our one plant, and that should that be sufficient? I don't know. I've had this conversation with the sis, and it's like, well, then they'd lose the farmer money, wouldn't they? They would lose the money from the pharmaceuticals, the government, the two invested. It's like, I think when they work out how they can make some money from it, license it. If needs be, put a price on for a license, yearly license. Simple. There's ways out, there's solutions to all sorts. You just got to use your flipping brain, common sense most of the time. So anyway, I'm going off. I'm going to make a cup of coffee. So let me know your thoughts. So there's 3 links I'm going to put in the description section. One is the study from the Colorado University. The other is the British Medical Journal link. And the other one is a paper from the National Institute of Health, in brackets .gov, a non-conventional approach to Parkinson's disease. And it also mentions Alzheimer's in there. So there's another one I'll also put in, actually, cannabinoids in late life, Parkinson's disease and dementia. So I'm going to add those in. It is worth noting, it would also matter to your body. Like, if you smoke, that's going to affect maybe your chest, your lungs, your heart, your circulation system. How? We need to look at that also. So it's, in what way do you medicate? In some kind of cooking? As a tincture? As an oil? Or smoke? And how does that affect the body? The brain, it's all looking positive. But the rest of the body matters also, doesn't it? So join the conversation. Let us know your experiences or your thoughts. Email us. cafesoulpod@gmail.com. Bye for now.